both intellectually fascinating and heart stimulating.
Yeah.
So I just spoke to somebody who said, we're just full. We're full in our hearts and our minds, and we'll take all of this with us. So the first thing I have been thinking about is been how you talked on Friday night and in Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul about Teilhard de Chardin, and his time in China particularly being the time that the sacred feminine kind of woke, he became aware of that.
Yeah.
And when you said the other night, I wasn't aware of the timing particularly of him being there, but you said when World War II ended, he left China. And what jumped into my head was something else that happened in China during World War II, was that the first woman priest was ordained in the Anglican Communion. Florence Lee Timoy, who is a deacon and serving in a remote part of China, and there were no priests that could get there, so the bishop got himself there and ordained her, made her a priest, and she began to serve that community through the war. And then was, because of the outcry, global outcry, once the war ended and people found out this had happened, wasn't able to exercise her priestly ministry for many, many years until she finally emigrated to Canada. And towards the end of her life, she again began to function in that role of celebrating the sacraments. So she's kind of our foremother, my foremother in this process and position. And it just was so fascinating to me that here's Teilhard in China and the sacred feminine kind of waking up in him. And here's, one large sort of segment of Christianity waking up to the full expression of women's roles in the church. So my question has to do with the divine feminine. And you speak about it. And I'm curious about, we think of the second half of the 20th century, the whole 20th century really, as a time of tremendous progress in history for women, and also a lot of 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if you could talk about, first of all, when you talk about the divine feminine, what you mean by that, because I think people are, from our conversations yesterday, still trying to wrap their heads around that. And then what it has to do or how it interplays with the lives of actual women, right? Because we've talked about the divine feminine and masculine being present in women and men. And to, cast the net as wide as we know it actually goes, including the queer community, where people express and live into the divine masculine and feminine in themselves in ways that kind of break down our binaries. So just a little question. Can I just get at it, any part of it you like?
Yeah. You've had too much time to formulate. Yeah. No, these are such important questions. Thanks for coming back in and being part of this conversation. I love dialogue, and sometimes when I'm about to do a podcast or a dialogue like this, my dialogue partner will say, I'll send you a list of questions beforehand. And I always say, no, I don't want to know your questions beforehand, because there's something so beautiful about live engagement. And in contexts like this, when a question is asked, the beautiful thing is that even if I haven't thought about it before, I just need to open my mouth and see what comes. and sometimes I find myself quite surprised at what's coming. And I think that's the nature of live conversation. So thank you for hosting this live encounter. It's interesting, isn't it, what you were saying about Teilhard being in China and around the same time a woman is ordained. Because I think that sometimes happens. It's almost like a spirit of awareness or a spirit of new beginning is happening in the same place, the same locality. I had a really important moment in my own life when I was leader of the Abbey community on Iona. A friend of the Iona community named Harry Underhill, who was the nephew of the great Evelyn, or Evelyn Underhill, English mystic. He realized that the Abbey community could do with some exposure to the East. So he offered to take me to India, and I spent a month in the ashram of Bede Griffiths, who was this great Benedictine monk from England, but he spent most of his life in India. And his most seminal work was called The Marriage of East and West, in which he saw how much we needed one another between East and West, and how much Christianity of the West had, as Gandhi said, when Christianity went to the West, it became the religion of kings. It became part of empire and power. And so I think the East has always held more of a sort of inner emphasis and attentiveness to the soul. So I arrived in the ashram of Bede Griffiths, and I did not know that Bede, in his 80s, had just had the most significant spiritual experience of his life. And it was accompanied by a stroke, what was medically being described as a stroke. But when he was able finally to speak about it, he said, well, the medics may call it a stroke, but I experienced it as a moment of illumination. And he had experienced the divine as feminine. And as he later said, it was too much for my old Western body. It sort of shook me down to the foundations of my being. And he looked like Moses having come down from Mount Sinai. And here was this wise man who had up here, had integrated so much of the East and the West, the masculine and the feminine. But that was different from an experience of God as feminine. And so he still wasn't speaking about it yet. He was still quite, he was regaining language again. And a few days after I arrived in the ashram, I was having my afternoon siesta. I think that's when I became a siesta fundamentalist. I'm very, I don't negotiate that part of the day, that's. So I was having my afternoon siesta and sleeping. And in my dream that came in the siesta, a beautiful young Indian woman in a sari was sitting on my bed and looking down into my face. And in the dream, when I looked into her face, she said, "My mother tells me that I have always loved you." And I woke in a flood of tears. And I encountered the mother. And her messenger was the East. Her messenger was this young woman from India. So what is it? Thank you very much. Is that Scottish liquid or is that? So I think, I'd like to speak a little bit from my experience, what I think was also Bede's experience and what I think was Teilhard's experience, because I had already been speaking about the importance of the divine and the feminine, as had Bede, as had Teilhard. But the experience of the divine as feminine took me to another place of the heart and of the realm of feeling and the realm of intuition. And I think one of the great prophets of the modern world was Carl Jung. I think many of his insights into the soul were quite remarkable and very prophetic, very anticipating of where many many in the world have gone since him. I think the prophet often has an experience or often speaks words that anticipate what is going to further open up. So I think that Jung tends to speak of the masculine energies within us as quite sort of mind-related, quite rational-related. He tends to speak of the feminine more in terms of that intuitive dimension within us in the realm of feeling, but also the realm of embodiment. Mm-hmm. The feminine is that part of us that is the birthing energy. And certainly in the Celtic tradition, a sense of the sacredness of earth and the sense of sacredness of feminine are inseparable. So if we're to truly come back into relationship with earth as sacred, that is inseparably held together with a coming back into relationship with the feminine. In the Celtic world, Bridget is a real icon of the sacred feminine. And what that means in Bridget's life is her deep earth connection, her deep sort of connection with the interrelatedness of all things. And she becomes associated with those transition moments of birthing and the transition through the river hard to see, as death is often referred to, but again that sort of transition through water, whether it's the waters of birth or the waters of death. So that I think is what some of these great prophetic figures are pointing to and what the Celtic tradition is pointing to. And as I was sort of touching on briefly yesterday, I think the sort of non-binary expression of our sexuality is a really significant attentiveness at an inner level to knowing and wanting to celebrate these two expressions of the divine. And I think there's so much disillusionment within our younger generations. We need to be in conversation with them because they know certain things that we have had to learn, but many of them know intuitively our connection with Earth. Many of them are knowing much more intuitively the dance or the love-making of the feminine and the masculine within us. And I think so many in that generation know that the systems that we have inherited are for the most part bankrupt. Whether that is our religious systems or our political systems, our cultural systems, have not prevented the crisis that we are in the midst of now, in which the very future of humanity is in doubt if we do not come back into touch, into real relationship with Earth and into real relationship with this flowing or intermingling of divine and masculine and feminine energies as divine within us. So I see that the sort of non-binary expressions as a really beautiful and courageous expression of the way things have been seen, the way things have been done in the past are not the only model. Yeah. So it's a good expression of we need to find new ways of more deeply integrating. And I think that's what many of us are yearning for. And an important key into what we have not known is, of course, the imagination. And certainly the Celtic world sees the imagination probably as our greatest faculty, and sees that we are made of God. We are made of the great dreamer who has dreamt the universe into being. And we are being invited now, given the mess that we are in politically, religiously, ecologically, we are in such a mess that we need to dream the way forward. And I think we can do this together. We can do this in our communities. And I see a real sort of link and resonance between meditative practice and attentiveness to the dreams of the night and attentiveness to imagination. I see them all as part of a continuum.
Mm-hmm. So those are some of the keys.
Sorry?
Those are some of the keys then,
Yeah,
you know,
that's right. Yeah.
to each of us individually living in this deeper reality and then acting from that place.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
So my second question is kind of my burning question that I've had since the Muir chapter of Sacred or Sacred Soul, because of course Muir is kind of our saint here in California.
Yeah.
He began on your end, you know, in Scotland.
No, he's our saint.
We can fight over John Muir, yeah, but he did wind up here, not too far from here is his home, and all that. And as a child, you know, going to the Sierras, I've known his name probably my whole life.
Yeah.
And it has to do with fire, so it's a burning question that has to do with fire.
Right.
Maybe you know your next work is using that as inspiration. But of course, here in California, we've experienced fire in some really dramatic ways in the last, especially here in our valley, you know, in the last few years. And it's become more and more come to our awareness that you know, the Native Californians didn't sort of just live in this beautiful garden that God had created, which was actually Muir's, I think, his thinking about that, his perception of that, and most of the people of his generation. You did a lovely job kind of contextualizing some of his words and actions around Native Californians, Native Americans, and how that evolved. But I feel like if he had spent as much time with the peoples of this place as he did with the other life forms of this place, and kind of embedded in their culture and life ways, he would have seen what they were actually doing, which we now understand, and Native Californians who are still around are interpreting this and becoming more and more a resource of how this land particularly, was managed within, you know, active memory within 150, 170 years. You know, we went from an indigenous way of managing the lands of California for thousands of years to all of a sudden genocide and that being cut off. And the primary, not the only, but one of the primary ways that the indigenous Californians managed the land was through fire. And so they would set fires. They knew the fertility of the land after a fire. And some of our species, including the giant sequoias, global treasure that we have here in California, came to rely and do rely on the presence of fire for their ongoing life and fertility. And so, you know, now after 170 years of fire suppression, climate change, we have this huge disaster on our hands. We're kind of like the globe in microcosm because we've been cut off from this indigenous way of relating to the earth. Yeah. So my question has to do with, you know, this thought that I'm not quoting exactly, but sort of loosely from that chapter about, you know, if we could sort of lift people out of the earth would be fine. But actually, I feel like this way of knowing, this experience we have here, which isn't unique globally, but certainly different from the European experience, of the interrelatedness of humanity and Earth, like maybe Earth needs us in some ways, like we need the Earth. So I wonder if you could speak to any of that.
Yeah, interesting. I think Teilhard de Chardin would agree with you, and I think he has the starting point of these great prophetic figures, certainly in the Celtic stream, is is always that we are earthlings. We are of earth. So to the extent that, in a sense, it's a bit of a false dichotomy to say earth and us and earth, because we are, you know. But I think the aspect of someone like Teilhard that's important is that he sees consciousness deep in all matter, and and consciousness is coming to a particular height of expression in humanity. So he would see that our gift of consciousness, and that's not to say that it's unique to humanity. Consciousness is in all matter, but our particular expression of consciousness, I think, is essential to the ongoing unfolding life of Earth as well. So to that extent, you know, although we may say Earth is going to heal itself, the question is whether humanity gets to be part of that healing. I think that if we don't manage to come back into true relationship with Earth, and the very future of humanity is endangered, then I think we do endanger a dimension of Earth more and more moving into consciousness. And so I think to that extent, it's absolutely a sort of mutual relationship. And I think some of that we see in someone like Muir. There's no reason why Muir should have known the extent to which we were going to infect and damage the life forms of Earth, because it wasn't, although it was in embryo happening. So much of the forest of this nation was being devastated at an unsustainable rate. So he saw some of that happening, but he didn't sort of reach the point of awareness of climate change. But I think the fire image or element is a really important one to pay attention to, because if to be made of the divine is in part to have the fire of the divine deep within us, I think part of what the native peoples, not only of this land but of other parts of the world, have known is the significance of fire to renew the land. So that's accessing fire for, in a sense, for the well-being of Earth and for the longer well-being of humanity. I think the fires that we are experiencing now can be seen as a judgment of the divine from deep within Earth, that are a fierce warning to humanity. That if we continue to ignore the well-being of Earth as part of our own well-being, then we will bring judgment on us, and part of what we're bringing upon us is the judgment of fire. But that's not the same sort of renewing fire that native peoples have known. This is a fire of judgment, and it's not a transcendent being who's sort of bringing the fire of judgment on us. This is the immanent one, deep within the matter of Earth. And when we create imbalances, as we are doing, then one of the expressions of that is fire, is flood. I interpret it as divine judgment.
That's fascinating. It's almost like as we've created a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you trace the origins of, how we think religiously of sort of hellfire and damnation back to original sin,
Right. Yeah.
But that coming out of the earth and the core of the earth itself is fire, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's fascinating.
You know, some of the Celtic teachers that I've been so influenced by repeatedly want to say that heaven and hell are present realities.
Mm-hmm.
They're not realities on the other side of the grave, or on the other side of life as we know it. They are present realities that when we know love, when we know the intimacy of love, when we know the harmony of love collectively, we experience heaven. Mm-hmm. Like Joe the dog, and he was in heaven, right?
He's in heaven, rounding up his people.
And so we have the capacity to create heaven, to be co-creators of heaven. And we have the capacity to create hell. And that's part of what we're doing at this moment in time, on a massive scale that threatens our life, the well-being of Earth.
That actually reminds me of another question I wanted to ask you that wasn't on my short list. Oh, getting off script here.
Oh,
but
good.
I think it's that we've talked a lot about the kind of getting away from the idea that what's at our very core is evil somehow or broken, and actually what is at our very core is blessedness and the spark of the divine. But as I've thought about the way that we kind of globally experience evil and the hells of our own making, feels sometimes as though there's this propensity, to forgetfulness, to wrong choices, to a very, very narrow view, or to fear, to whatever creates that falseness. Yeah. And there's also, I think, in people, a lot of times I encounter the sense that a brokenness that feels so deep that it feels original, And I think about now the science that infants are born with damaged telomeres in the DNA that transmits, generational trauma. And then we know about trauma that can happen even before birth, and trauma that can happen in the birth process. So when you look in the face of that newborn staring back at you, the face of God, right, the face of freshness of the divine, there's also some brokenness already written in both what we've brought them into and in their own beings. Yeah. So I just would love to know how you think about that in the concept of all this.
Well, a great prophet of today that has blessed me and with friendship as well as Matthew Fox. So many of you will know of Matthew Fox. He wrote, his most seminal work was Original Blessing, and that was seminal for so many of us. And he intimates in that book that was probably written 40 years ago, he intimates in that book that the Celtic stream is a stream within our Christian inheritance that taught original blessing rather than original sin. And one of the phrases that Matthew has subsequently, after writing Original Blessing, has subsequently felt very true in using is an important phrase, and that is he speaks of original wound. And that is we are born wounded, and we carry within us not only some of the sort of physical woundedness of our family's past, of our nation's past, of the human species past. We carry brokenness or woundedness within our souls, within our spirits. So to say that what is deepest in us or most original in us is blessing or of Godness is not to pretend that we aren't wounded. It's to say that deepest level, that fire of the divine has not been undone, or as the way John puts it in the prologue to his gospel, the light that enlightens every person coming into the world. That light is still there. It may have become clouded over in our cultures, in our families, in our nation, but it's there. It hasn't been undone. And I think that's the great the great prophetic gift of someone like Matthew, and I think that we see in the Celtic stream. It's always wanting to say, yes, we are broken. Yes, we know the pain of fragmentation and falseness between us as people and in our relationship with Earth. But the very essence of our being is of God, not opposed to God. So, as I think I was saying yesterday, when Jesus uses the phrase that we need to be born again, he's not suggesting, as a good rabbi, he would never be saying that we need to become something other than ourselves. He's really speaking about that which is deepest in us, coming forth again with the radicalness of birth. So it's so important to keep an eye to the essence, to the of-Godness, to the glory that is shining deep within, and to have an eye always to the brokenness that we carry individually, but also collectively. And I think that's a major part of the way forward. This isn't a sort of romanticism when we speak about the essential blessedness or the essential sacredness at the heart of our being. It's not a romantic denial of just how broken we are, nor is it a denial of just how false and destructive we can become. But it is a pointing to what is deepest. The other night I spoke of John Scotus Eriugena, this 9th century Irish teacher. And one of the very, very powerful aspects of his teaching for me has been that whenever he refers to the Satan figure in Scripture, he calls him by name, by his original name, which is Lucifer, which means angel of light. And he says that Satan is false to the extent that he's not being himself. But his practice of calling Satan by his original name, in a sense, not willing to define him just in terms of the falseness that he is part of or is engaged with, but trying to call him back to himself. And Eriugena believes that the Satan figure will return to himself. But I think he also gives us a way of speaking about one another. And who are the figures of terrible falseness and destructiveness in this nation and in different parts of the world? I think Eriugena is saying, let us call them by name, by their original name, which is brother of light, son of light, and call them back to themselves. And we're not calling others to become like us, which is the slippery slope of so many passionately driven justice movements and so on. Self-righteousness will undermine us and will kill our movements. So we're not calling others to become like us. We're calling them to become truly themselves, made of God, brother of light.
Right.
And let's call out their falseness, let's confront it, let's name it, let's denounce it. But remember that their essence is of God. That essence hasn't been undone. And how do we speak and live in ways that call the other to return to that essence?
Gosh, amen. Hallelujah. I am curious about the role of Jesus in that, in our household, right? Not because we're calling others to become like us, but, you talk about Jesus being, and it's been beautiful to think about in the season of Epiphany, which means manifestation, the one that lifts the veil and shows all of us that we are beloved children of God. I really try to convince people that it's a hard sell sometimes. But I wonder about Jesus' role in this work of kind of getting back to ourselves, right? Jesus shows us who we are, and here we are with now this vision of who we are and this brokenness, and like your beautiful story about your grandson, asking him to say please about the cookie, and he said, well, it won't come out, sometimes it just won't come out. So I think about words like our $20 words in Christianity, grace and redemption and even salvation, and how do you think about those things and the role of Jesus the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, in helping us find that way back to ourselves?
Yeah. I'm passionate in my belief that if we don't return, and by return I mean recover what many of these sort of Celtic Christian prophets pointed to, but they're not alone. Of course, there's the whole mystic stream in our Christianity that ends up expressing very similar things to what some of these Celtic. So I'm not a Celtic fundamentalist. I'm not suggesting we all need to become Celtic, but I think they hold great wisdom for us. And I think very close to the greatness of their wisdom is again and again to see that Jesus is not an exception to humanity, that Jesus is the great revealer, the great manifester, the great lifter of the veil. And I believe that unless we recover this understanding of Jesus, I think that the very future of Christianity, I think, rests or falls on this issue. I love what Martin Buber, the great Jewish thinker, teacher, says about. He loves Jesus. He calls Jesus his brother, and he sees Jesus as very importantly receiving from his Jewish inheritance and then really challenging his own tradition. And he sees that that's what we are to do. But he says, I don't believe in Jesus. I believe with Jesus.
Oh, wow.
And what if we had got that one right? Wow. I mean, I think we would have had this different approach, because I think part of the sort of shadow side of where so much Western Christian doctrine has been in trying to make Jesus an exception to humanity, or somehow embodying something that is foreign to us, rather than embodying and showing to us what our essence is that part of what has happened, I suppose there was a trade-off in a sense, between imperial Christianity, between empire and imperial Christianity. Because I think part of what Jesus is, embodies what is foreign to us rather than showing us our essence. Then we end up saying that he has to do all the work.
Yeah, good
right?
call. Yeah.
So then his work on the cross is the work of salvation.
Right. We all get off.
Instead of seeing that our work is to be the work of salvation for one another, for earth, for our own being. And he doesn't say, I will take up my cross so that you don't have to. He doesn't say that.
Nope.
He says, follow me.
Yeah.
He invites us into the way of the cross, which is, I think, very related to how do we dissolve the separating ego? How do we do the work of dying to the way in which the ego claims to be the center, rather than serving the center? So it's not to put down the ego. The ego is this amazing faculty of consciousness and willpower. And that's what I love about my little grandson, Santino. He's got a good, strong ego. And we need to encourage the ego in our children and in one another. And I love what Mahatma Gandhi says, I think in the final sentence of his autobiography, he says, I must become zero. And but who is this man that's saying that? He knew how colorful his ego was. He knew how he could bring his ego to serve his nation, to serve its people, to serve Earth, to call us into the way of nonviolence. So to speak about dying to the self, sometimes that has been translated into needing to become a doormat or something. And I think Jesus is inviting us into something much more robust than that, and is inviting us to know that ours is the work of bringing salvation.
Yeah.
Ours is the work of bringing that healing. And we will only do it, I believe, to the extent that we harness this amazing faculty that we have, the ego. And when it's not harnessed by love, my goodness, it can do the sort of damage that we saw in Nazi Germany and that we're seeing today in this nation.
Yeah, wow, those are powerful words to take us into Lent. You know, that we kind of have 40 days to practice that ritually, that dying to self and harnessing with love. Yeah, thank you for that. I do have one more question. I think I might just hog the questions here. Are there people out there with burning questions? Jacob's got a burning question. Okay. Go ahead. How do you define ego?
Right. Yeah. I think I would define it in terms of that. I think the ego is this sort of holder of consciousness and holder of willpower. So the ego within us, or what we have come to refer to as ego, is that dimension within us that can move into greater consciousness, or can choose, of course, to neglect consciousness. Because, of course, the ego is so skilled at avoiding consciousness or avoiding awareness, if that serves the small self. But the ego does have this capacity to grow in consciousness, and the ego is that dimension within us that exercises the power of choice. So my ego, for instance, may become conscious of the fact that your well-being is part of my well-being, and Earth's well-being is part of our well-being. The ego may move into that degree of consciousness. But then it's another question, will my ego therefore choose to act in a way that serves that consciousness? And of course that's the much more challenging point for ego. If what ego wants to pretend is that my small self can be well just by looking after myself and ignoring your well-being. So I think that it's that twin function. It has that part of us that can become more conscious, can become more aware, but very importantly, it's also that part of us that has to choose. Will I serve that awareness of our interrelatedness, and therefore, will I live in such a way that I don't continue to pretend that I can be well when you're not? Yeah. Thank you.
Any other burning questions? Oh, Susan's got one, yeah.
Well, it's a burning question because I feel it comes out of the work that some of us have been doing with Amy and Julie Garvey before you came. And it was a tremendous energy and given us, a really blazing light to follow. But your experience of talking to many, many people like us, how can you give us some keys of how we can keep this flame alive and grow? Because I still feel that in this world we're a small minority of people who feel this way, and we don't have much time. So I'm wondering if you can give us some words of wisdom about how we could go forward as a community to best keep this flame burning.
Well, I think the only wisdom I could try to offer you is the wisdom that I'm trying to follow in my own life, and that is, I find it really important on a daily basis to practice meditative awareness, meditative stillness. I think, and I've been doing this for many years, but I think early on in my practice of meditative awareness, I would sometimes wake up and think, I've got too many things on today. I'm far too important to spend half an hour on meditation. And of course that's the ego, getting out of balance. But I think I discovered quite early on that if I try neglecting that meditative practice, that time of silence, that time of inner listening, reorienting, that time of being reconnected to my essence, I discovered very early on that the day really goes downhill if I neglect that practice. So I think both individually, that is a type of wisdom that I would want to share coming out of my own experience. And that is expressed at an individual level, but I think it's also really important to find ways of returning to the center or being in silence or meditative practice, whatever we want to call it. But I think it's important that we find ways of doing that together as well. And there's something so qualitatively richer and deeper. What we experienced yesterday morning at the beginning of our day, that was like palpably richer for me than simply being in silence on my own. Mm-hmm. I'll continue that individual practice, but I really believe in community and the shared practice. So I think that's something that's really important. I think it's really important to access these great prophetic figures, these great teachers of the past, who are saying, so often they are saying something so different from the prevalent voice in education, even in religion, in our culture. So some of these wisdoms that have been rejected because they're inconvenient to the ego of our nation or the ego of our religion or our individual egos, we need to keep accessing this wisdom because I believe they are pointing into what will keep that fire strong and blazing for awareness, for creativity, for dreaming, for imagining. So accessing some of those great teachers is important because it's so easy to keep forgetting because there are other voices that are dominating, in whether politically or whether sort of religiously or often in our educational systems, there are voices that are dominating there. So let's make sure that we keep accessing and cherishing these voices that have often been powers tried to push them out. So connection with that sort of wisdom is important, and that's very much again what I've delighted in doing in my own teaching and my own writing work, it's really based on just accessing great figures of the past and trying to distill their wisdom and trying to speak it anew for today. I love what the Jewish mystics say when they speak of new ancient wisdom. So there's this stream of wisdom that's come down to us, but we need to speak it anew, we need to speak it afresh, but we can be renewed by their wise insights. And I think the other sort of source of great strength that I know in my own life and would always want to encourage in others is returning again and again to the sacred text of nature, to the text of earth. Because that, as I was trying to say in the sermon this morning, the body of earth is made of the substance of God, substance of the divine. And by listening deeply, by being in true relationship, we will again and again be reminded of the wisdom of the divine. It's in the body of earth. It's in nature's very makeup. So often religion, empire was not a system based on earth. Empire has tended to lift itself above nature, above earth. And similarly, the religion of empire has not been based on nature and on earth. And this is part of what the great indigenous traditions and something like the Celtic tradition keep saying. Earth is text, is sacred text, and we need to keep learning there. So those would be the sort of three sources. Yeah.
We don't want to let you go, but we have to. So reluctantly, and with all the thanks of my heart, and I think of all of ours, thank you for being with us. Thank you for giving us this great, like Susan said, a kind of shining light to move forward with. Yeah, you'll remain in our hearts, both of you, and we hope to stay connected over the years.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Come and see us.
Deep peace. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.